In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like tides, there exists a universal truth that every species learns eventually. When the darkness comes calling, when the odds are impossible, and when hope seems like a distant memory, there's only one race crazy enough to charge headfirst in a certain death with a smile on their faces. They call them humans. Most species in the Galactic Alliance viewed humanity as the galaxy's wild card, unpredictable, reckless, and utterly fascinating in their complete disregard for conventional military doctrine. While other races calculated odds and weighed probabilities, humans had a saying that sent shivers down alien spines. Hold my beer and watch this. Today, that saying would echo across the cosmos as the Alliance's most desperate hour approached, and a single human battalion prepared to rewrite the very definition of impossible odds. The emergency beacon from Kepler, 442b, cut through the silence of deep space like a scream in the night. Admiral Zephyr High of the Galactic Alliance fleet read the transmission with growing horror, her four eyes widening as each line revealed a situation more desperate than the last. The Zephyrian homeworld was under siege. 3 days ago, the Void Reapers had emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies, a mechanical plague that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty husks of dead worlds in their wake. They had appeared without warning at the edge of Zephyrian space, their massive dreadnoughts cutting through the outer defense fleets like paper. Now they surrounded Kepler 442b, home to 12 billion Zephyrians, with a blockade so complete that not even a single escape pod had made it past their perimeter. The planet's shields were failing, and orbital bombardment would begin within 48 hours. After that, the harvest would commence. Admiral Zephyr High's flagship, the Eternal Dawn, was the last remaining heavy cruiser in the sector, but what could one ship do against a fleet of 200 Void Reaper dreadnoughts? Her crew of 800 brave souls would fight to the last, but mathematics was a cruel mistress. They would buy perhaps an hour before being overwhelmed. "Admiral," came the voice of communications officer Talmor, his usually steady tone cracking with barely contained fear. "We've received responses from Fleet Command. The nearest Alliance reinforcements are 6 days out. The Andromedans are engaged in the Cygnus front, the Centaurians are defending their trade routes, and the Altarian Navy lost half their fleet last week." Zephyr High closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 12 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. 6 days. They had 48 hours before the bombardment began, and 6 days until help arrived. The math was simple and brutal. "What about independent contractors? Mercenary fleets?" she asked, grasping at straws. "I've sent queries to every registered military contractor in this sector," Talmor replied. The ones who bothered to respond all said the same thing. The pay isn't worth facing the Void Reapers. Those who fight them don't usually live to spend their earnings. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional beep of sensor arrays. Outside the viewports, the stars looked down with cold indifference, offering no solutions to their impossible situation. Then, Talmor's console chimed with an incoming transmission. "Admiral, we have a response to our distress call," he said, his voice puzzled. "It's unusual." "From whom?" Zephyr High asked, turning her attention to the communication station. "The message is from someone called Colonel Marcus Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Force. He says they're willing to assist." Zephyr High felt her heart skip. Umans. The galaxy's newest members to the Alliance were known for their unpredictability, but they were also notorious for taking impossible odds and, somehow, making them work. Still, what could they possibly bring to this fight? "Put him through," she ordered. The hologram that materialized above the communications console showed a human male with graying hair at his temples and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless battles. He wore a simple military uniform with minimal decorations, but there was something about his bearing that commanded immediate respect. "Admiral Zephyr High, I'm Colonel Chun of the 1st Terran Shock Battalion. We received your distress call, and we're en route to assist." "Colonel, I appreciate your willingness to help, but you need to understand the situation. We're facing a full Void Reaper harvest fleet, 200 dreadnoughts, each one capable of cracking a moon. How many ships are you bringing? The human's expression didn't change. 1. Zephyr High felt her hopes crumble. Colonel, with all due respect, 1 human ship against 200, not 1 ship, Admiral. 1 battalion. We don't need ships where we're going. The confusion on the bridge was palpable. Navigation Officer Kextar spoke up, his mandibles clicking nervously. Colonel, I don't understand. How does a ground force engage a space fleet? Colonel Chin's lips curved into what humans called a smile, but Zephyr High found it more unsettling than reassuring. You'll see. We'll be at your position in 18 hours. In the meantime, I need everything you have on Void Reaper ship layouts, weaknesses, power distribution networks, and crew complements. Colonel, Zephyr High interrupted, the Void Reapers don't have crews in the traditional sense. They're entirely automated, controlled by central AI cores protected deep within each ship. Even better, Chen replied. AI cores can be hacked, overloaded, or simply removed. Physical crews tend to fight back more creatively. Weapons Officer Yulera leaned forward, her scaled features tense with curiosity and disbelief. You're talking about boarding actions? Against Void Reaper dreadnoughts? Colonel, these ships are the size of small cities with automated defense systems that can track and eliminate thousands of targets simultaneously. Good intel, thank you. What about their hull composition? Tricarbon weave over quantum lock steel framework, effectively impervious to conventional weapons. What about unconventional weapons? Yulera's eyes widened. You need antimatter charges or singularity bombs to breach those hulls, and even then, we'll make do with what we have, Chen interrupted calmly. Admiral, 18 hours. Have that intel ready. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Is he insane? Kextar Vispirit. A single battalion against 200 dreadnoughts? Even if they somehow managed to board 1 ship, they'd be annihilated within minutes. Zephyr High had worked with humans before, during the Rigel incident 3 years ago. She'd seen them do things that defied logic, tactics, and sometimes the laws of physics themselves. But this seemed like suicide even by human standards. Talmor, patch me through to Fleet Intelligence. I want everything we have on this Colonel Chun and his first shock battalion. The information that came back 2 hours later only deepened the mystery. The 1st Terran Shock Battalion was listed as a Special Operations Unit with a classified mission profile. Their service record was impressive but heavily redacted, showing only that they'd been involved in 17 major engagements over the past 5 years with a 100% mission success rate. What caught Zephyr High's attention were the casualty reports, or rather, the lack thereof. In 17 major engagements, including 3 against seemingly impossible odds, the battalion had suffered 0 fatalities and minimal injuries. Either they were the luckiest soldiers in the galaxy, or they were very, very good at what they did. The Eternal Dawn waited, orbiting at the edge of the Kepler system, while long-range sensors tracked the approaching Void Reaper fleet. 200 massive signatures moving with mechanical precision toward their target, each one representing enough firepower to sterilize a continent. 18 hours later, exactly as promised, the human ship arrived. At first, the sensors couldn't locate it. Then, Talmor recalibrated the detection arrays and found a signature so small it barely registered as a blip. Admiral, he said, voice tight with disbelief, the human vessel it's a single transport ship. Lightly armed, minimal shielding. It's barely larger than a courier vessel. Through the main viewport, Zephyr High could see a sleek craft approaching their position. It was elegant in its simplicity, but woefully inadequate for what lay ahead. The thing looked like it belonged ferrying diplomats between peaceful worlds, not charging into the galaxy's most dangerous war zone. They're requesting permission to dock, Talmor reported. Granted, route them to docking Bay 7. 20 minutes later, Colonel Chun and his command staff were escorted onto the Eternal Dawn's bridge. The humans moved with a confidence that seemed at odds with their situation, chatting quietly among themselves and occasionally pointing at various ship systems with what appeared to be professional interest rather than fear. Chin approached Admiral Zephyrhai and offered the human gesture of respect, a handshake. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. "Admiral, thank you for the hospitality. I know this situation looks impossible, but we've handled worse." "Worse than 200 Void Reaper dreadnoughts?" she asked. "Well, there was that time we had to deal with 300 of them, but they were in a tighter formation, so it was actually easier." Zephyrhai wasn't sure if he was joking. Human humor was notoriously difficult to interpret. "Colonel, I prepared the intelligence reports you requested, but I have to ask, what exactly is your plan? How does a single battalion engage a fleet of this magnitude?" Chun gestured to one of his officers, a woman with lieutenant colonel's insignia, who activated a portable holographic projector. A three-dimensional image of the Void Reaper fleet formation appeared above the device, showing their precise positions and movement patterns. "The Reapers have made a tactical error," Chun began, pointing to the formation. "They're using a standard siege configuration, maximum coverage of all escape vectors, but it leaves their individual ships relatively isolated from mutual support." "That's still 200 ships," Weapons Officer Yulera interjected, "each one armed with enough firepower to level a city." "True, but they have 3 critical weaknesses," the lieutenant colonel said, manipulating the hologram to highlight specific areas on the dreadnoughts. "First, their automated systems have predictable response patterns. Second, their AI cores are networked for efficiency, which creates vulnerability. Third, they're designed to fight other ships, not infantry." Chin took over the explanation. "We're going to bore them." "Ow!" Kekstar demanded. "Their point defense systems will destroy any shuttle or assault craft long before you reach their hulls." "We're not using conventional insertion methods," Chin replied. "Tell me, Admiral, how familiar are you with human military doctrine?" "Somewhat. You prefer aggressive tactics, combined arms approaches, and you have an unusual relationship with acceptable casualty rates." "True, but there's something else. We have a saying, when the enemy expects you to come through the door, come through the wall. When they expect you to come through the wall, come through the floor. When they expect you to come through the floor, you come through the ceiling." "Zephyrhai vento." Chin's smile returned. "We don't come through anything. We were already inside." The hologram shifted to show detailed schematics of Void Reaper internal architecture. The lieutenant colonel highlighted a series of maintenance conduits and service passages that ran throughout each ship. "Void Reaper ships are built for efficiency, not security," she explained. "Their internal layout prioritizes power distribution and automated repair systems. There are thousands of access points throughout each ship that are large enough for human-sized infiltrators but too small for their internal defense drones." "That still doesn't explain how you get inside in the first place," Yulera insisted. Chin looked at Admiral Zephyrhai with an expression that was equal parts apology and determination. "That's where we're going to need your help, Admiral. We need the Eternal Dawn to get us close." "Close to what?" "Close enough to board." Zephyrhai felt her blood run cold. "Colonel, you're talking about a suicide run. The moment we approach their formation, every gun in that fleet will target us. We'll be vaporized before we get within 10,000 kilometers of the nearest ship." "Not if we time it right," Chin said calmly. "We've been studying Void Reaper tactical patterns for the past 6 months. They have a fatal flaw. They're too organized. Their response protocols are predictable, and they prioritize threats based on mathematical probabilities rather than tactical creativity." The lieutenant colonel manipulated the hologram again, showing the fleet's formation and highlighting specific ships. "If we approach from this vector at this speed, we'll trigger their standard intercept formation. They'll reposition exactly like this, creating a 17-second window where ship designation VR 127 will be isolated from crossfire support. 17 seconds to get close enough to board a ship that doesn't want to be boarded," Kekstar said slowly. "That's not a plan. That's assisted suicide." "It's enough time," Chin said with absolute conviction. My people are very good at their jobs, Admiral. Trust me when I say that 17 seconds is a luxury. Zephyr High studied the human colonel, trying to read the truth in his alien features. Everything about this plan defied conventional wisdom, tactical doctrine, and basic common sense. But 12 billion lives hung in the balance, and conventional wisdom had already failed them. Even if you somehow managed to board one ship, Colonel, what then? You'll be trapped aboard a dreadnought with thousands of automated defenses hunting you down. And there's still 199 other ships in that fleet. One ship at a time, Admiral. We take the first one, then we use it to take the second. Network their weaknesses against them. Turn their own organization into a liability. And if it doesn't work? Chin was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then 12 billion people die whether we try this or not. At least this way, they die knowing someone was willing to try something crazy to save them. The bridge fell silent as everyone contemplated the magnitude of what the humans were proposing. It was audacious, reckless, and probably doomed to failure. It was also the only option they had. Admiral Zephyr High made her decision. What do you need from us, Colonel? Just get us to that 17-second window, Admiral. After that, it's our fight. As the Eternal Dawn began preparations for what would either be the most brilliant tactical maneuver in galactic history or the most spectacular suicide run ever attempted, Colonel Chun stood at the viewport looking out at the stars. His reflection showed a man who had seen too much war, but his eyes held something that no amount of conflict could dim. Hope. Behind him, his soldiers began their final equipment checks with the casual efficiency of people who had done impossible things before and expected to do them again. They joked quietly with each other, shared pictures from home, and made plans for what they'd do when this was over. Not if they survived. When? Because if there was one thing humans had taught the galaxy, it was that impossible was just another word for Tuesday. 6 hours before the planned insertion, Colonel Chin stood in the Eternal Dawn's main briefing room addressing his battalion. The assembled soldiers represented humanity's finest, men and women from every nation on Earth, united by their willingness to venture into the dark spaces between stars and fight impossible battles against impossible odds. They called themselves the Omega Battalion, though official records listed them as the 1st Terran Shock Battalion. The nickname had started as a joke about always being sent on missions that should have been their last, but somewhere along the way it had become a badge of honor. When the galaxy needed someone to attempt the impossible, they called Omega. Ladies and gentlemen, Chin began, his voice carrying easily through the room. Today we're going to do something that has never been attempted in the history of galactic warfare. We're going to board and capture a Void Reaper dreadnought using nothing but small arms, explosives, and sheer bloody-minded determination. A hand went up in the crowd. Sergeant Maria Santos, demolition specialist, grinned as she spoke. Sir, just to be clear, when you say capture, you mean blow up from the inside, right? Initially, yes. But if we can take one intact, we're going to turn it against the others. Think of it as aggressive recycling. Laughter rippled through the room. It was a peculiarly human trait, this ability to find humor in the face of certain death. Admiral Zephyr High, who had insisted on observing the briefing, found it both disturbing and oddly comforting. Chun activated the holographic display, showing detailed schematics of a Void Reaper dreadnought. The ship was a nightmare of angular geometry and cold efficiency, every surface designed to maximize destructive potential while minimizing wasted space. Intelligence analysis indicates that each dreadnought is controlled by a central AI core located here, Chin said, highlighting a section deep within the ship's superstructure. The core is heavily shielded and protected by multiple redundant defense systems. Getting to it won't be easy. Lieutenant Sarah Park, the battalion's chief intelligence officer, took over the presentation. Each ship carries approximately 10,000 automated defense drones, ranging from small surveillance units to heavy combat platforms. The drones are networked through the central AI, which gives them exceptional coordination, but also creates a single point of failure. What kind of single point of failure? Asked Corporal James Murphy, a heavy weapons specialist whose thick Irish accent always became more pronounced before combat. If we can isolate the AI core from its network, the drones lose their coordinated response capability. They'll still be dangerous individually, but they won't be able to work together effectively. Chen resumed control of the briefing. Our insertion strategy is unconventional, even by our standards. We're going to use emergency boarding tubes, essentially one-way tickets that will punch through the Dreadnought's hull and deliver us directly into their maintenance sections. The boarding tubes were a human innovation, originally designed for space rescue operations. Each tube was essentially a guided missile with a hollow interior, capable of penetrating ship hulls and creating a temporary airlock for personnel transfer. Using them as assault vehicles was either brilliant or insane, depending on your perspective. "Sir," called out Sergeant First Class David Kim, a medic whose steady hands had saved dozens of lives during previous operations. "What's our extraction plan?" "We don't have one," Chen replied bluntly. "Once we're inside, our only way out is to complete the mission. We take the ship, or we die trying." Another voice from the crowd. "And if we take the ship, then we use it to take the next one. And the one after that. We keep going until either we've eliminated the entire fleet, or there's none of us left to continue." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just being asked to assault a Void Reaper dreadnought. They were being asked to fight an entire fleet from the inside, ship by ship, with no possibility of retreat. Technical Sergeant Lisa Chun, the colonel's niece and the battalion's senior electronics warfare specialist, raised her hand. Colonel, what about command and control once we're aboard? Standard communications won't work through that much ship structure. Each team will operate independently once insertion is complete. You all know your objectives. You all know the contingency plans. Trust your training, trust your teammates, and trust that everyone else is doing their job. Admiral Zephyr High watched the human soldiers absorb this information with remarkable calm. There were no protests, no requests for transfer, no demands for better odds. They simply nodded and began discussing technical details among themselves, as if they were planning a routine training exercise rather than a mission that would probably kill them all. "Colonel," she said quietly, approaching him as the briefing broke up and soldiers began their final preparations, "I have to ask, have you ever attempted anything like this before?" Chen was quiet for a moment, watching his people check their equipment with practiced efficiency. "No," I admitted. "This is definitely a first." "Then, how can you be so confident?" "Because," he said, turning to look at her with those steady eyes, "we've never failed a mission. Not one. And we're not about to start now." 3 hours later, the Eternal Dawn began its approach toward the Void Reaper fleet. Admiral Zephyr High stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as they moved deeper into enemy territory. Every instinct she possessed screamed that this was suicide, but the humans had been so calm, so confident, that she almost believed it might work. The Void Reaper ships were massive, each one stretching nearly 5 kilometers from bow to stern. Their hulls were matte black, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it, and their weapon arrays bristled from every surface like technological thorns. Even from a distance of 50,000 kilometers, they were intimidating beyond description. "Admiral," reported sensor operator Veltar, "the Reapers are responding to our approach. Lead elements are beginning to reposition." Just like the humans predicted, Zephyrheim murmured, "Helm, maintain current heading and speed." The next few minutes passed with agonizing slowness. The Void Reaper fleet moved with mechanical precision, their formation shifting to create overlapping fields of fire that would incinerate any approaching vessel. But they were following their programming, doing exactly what the human analysis had predicted they would do. "Reaper formation change complete," Veltar announced. "Target ship VR 127 is now isolated, just as projected." "Colonel Chan to bridge," came the human's voice over the comm system. We're ready for insertion. Beginning final approach to launch position. Through the internal cameras, HFY could see the humans making their final preparations. They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before, checking weapons, adjusting armor, and making last-minute equipment adjustments. Each soldier carried enough firepower to level a city block, compressed into a package that weighed less than their body armor. Admiral, Chen's voice continued. Once we launch, get your ship clear. Don't wait around to see if we make it. Your job is to survive long enough to report what happens here. Understood, Colonel. Good hunting. Thank you, Admiral. See you on the other side. The boarding tubes launched simultaneously from multiple points on the Eternal Dawn's hull, their rocket motors burning bright against the darkness of space. Each tube carried 20 soldiers, and there were 5 tubes total, 100 human warriors racing toward the most dangerous ships in the galaxy at nearly 1,000 meters per second. HFY watched the tactical display with growing tension as the tubes streaked toward their target. The Void Reaper Dreadnought's point defense systems activated, filling space around the approaching projectiles with deadly energy beams and explosive rounds. The first tube disappeared in a burst of superheated plasma. Then the second. Admiral, Veltar said, his voice tight with stress, we're losing them. The point defenses are too dense. But the remaining 3 tubes were already adjusting their approach, their guidance systems responding to the threat within human precision. They jinked and weaved through the defensive fire, their armored hulls ablative plates designed to absorb punishment that would destroy conventional spacecraft. The third tube took a direct hit and began tumbling, its trajectory becoming erratic. For a moment, it looked like it would miss the target entirely, but then its emergency thrusters fired, and it slammed into the Dreadnought's hull just aft of the main sensor array. The fourth and fifth tubes struck their targets seconds later, punching through the tricarbon hull plating and disappearing into the ship's interior. Impact flashes briefly illuminated the Dreadnought's surface, and then all was quiet. Did they make it? Kextar asked. Onum, Veltar replied. I'm reading hull breaches at the impact sites, but there's too much interference to determine if any of the insertion teams survived. HFY stared at the tactical display, watching the tiny blip that represented 60 human soldiers who had just thrown themselves into the heart of a nightmare. There would be no communication, no status updates, no way to know if they were alive or dead until either the mission succeeded or the ship's weapons turned on the Eternal Dawn. Helm, take us clear of the engagement zone, she ordered. Full power to engines. The Eternal Dawn began to withdraw, leaving the humans to their impossible task. As they pulled back, HFY found herself offering a prayer to whatever deities might be listening. If there was any justice in the universe, those brave souls would find a way to succeed. Deep within the bowels of Void Reaper Dreadnought VR 127, Sergeant Maria Santos picked herself up off the deck plating and ran a quick systems check. Her armor was intact, her weapons were functional, and, amazingly, she was still alive. The boarding tube had done its job, punching through the ship's hull and delivering her team directly into what appeared to be a maintenance shaft. Sound off, she whispered into her comm unit, keeping her voice low in case the ship's internal sensors were listening. Murphy here, still breathing. Park, operational. Kim, ready to patch holes. Thompson locked and loaded. One by one, her team reported in. 20 soldiers had entered the boarding tube, and 18 had survived the insertion. Not bad odds, all things considered. All right, people, Santos said, checking her tablet for their assigned route through the ship. We have a job to do. Our target is the Auxiliary Power Distribution Center, Section C-7. Intelligence says if we can overload their power grid, it'll create cascading failures throughout the ship's systems. The maintenance shaft was barely large enough for a human to crawl through, which was exactly what made it perfect for their purposes. The Void Reapers had designed their ships for efficiency, not for repelling boarders, and the network of service tunnels provided perfect cover for a small infiltration team. Santos led the way, following the route that had been burned into her memory during countless briefings and simulations. Behind her, 18 of humanity's finest warriors crawled through the mechanical arteries of their enemy's most powerful ship, armed with nothing but courage, explosives, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The shaft opened into a larger corridor lined with massive power conduits and cooling systems. The air was cold and sterile, filled with the hum of machinery and the distant vibration of the ship's massive engines. Red warning lights cast everything in an ominous glow, and the walls were covered with alien symbols that meant nothing to human eyes. "Movement," Murphy whispered, raising his assault rifle as something rounded the corner ahead of them. The Void Reaper defense drone was the size of a small car, floating silently on repulsor fields and bristling with weapon systems. Its sensors swept back and forth, searching for intruders, but it passed right over their concealed positions without detecting them. Santos held her breath until the drone had moved out of sight, then gestured for her team to continue. Their intelligence had been accurate. The drones were designed to detect and engage large threats, not infiltrators using stealth tactics and human-sized access ways. They made good time through the ship's interior, following maintenance passages and service corridors that bypassed the main thoroughfares where defensive systems would be concentrated. Twice more they encountered patrol drones, and twice more they avoided detection by using tactics that no artificial intelligence had been programmed to expect. "Target acquired," Santos whispered as they reached their objective. The Auxiliary Power Distribution Center was a vast chamber filled with massive energy conduits and control systems that regulated power flow throughout the ship. It was also completely unguarded. The Void Reapers had never considered that anyone might actually make it this far. Thompson, Murphy, set charges on the main conduits. Park, Kim, take the control systems. Everyone else, watch the entrances. We got 5 minutes to wire this place and get clear. The demolition work proceeded with practiced efficiency. Humanity's soldiers had done this sort of thing before, though never under quite these circumstances. Shaped charges were placed with mathematical precision, timers were synchronized, and backup detonators were installed in case the primary systems failed. "Charges set," Thompson reported. 5 minutes to detonation. "Roger that." Everyone back to the rally point. They retraced their route through the ship's maintenance systems, moving as quickly as stealth would allow. Behind them, timer displays counted down toward zero, toward the moment when 60 pounds of military-grade explosives would introduce the Void Reaper dreadnought to the human concept of creative destruction. Santos's team was the first to reach their extraction point, a cargo bay that intelligence had identified as suitable for the next phase of their mission. The other teams were supposed to rendezvous here after completing their own objectives, but so far there was no sign of them. Come on, she muttered, checking her chronometer. 3 minutes until detonation. A service hatch opened across the bay, and another team of soldiers emerged, led by Sergeant First Class Rodriguez from 2nd Squad. His team had been tasked with disabling the ship's internal communication systems, and, from his satisfied expression, Santos guessed they'd been successful. "Any word from 3rd Squad?" Rodriguez asked. "Nothing yet. They had the hardest target, the primary sensor array." 2 minutes. Another hatch opened, and 3rd Squad appeared, moving fast and looking pleased with themselves. Sergeant Jackson gave Santos a thumbs up as his team took defensive positions around the bay. "All teams accounted for," Santos said into her comm. "Detonation in 90 seconds. 1 minute. 30 seconds. 10. The explosion, when it came, was felt rather than heard. The ship shuddered around them, and the lights flickered as power systems throughout the dreadnought began failing in cascading waves. Emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in red, and somewhere in the distance alarms began to wail. "Phase 1 complete," Santos announced. Now for the fun part. The fun part involved fighting their way to the ship's central AI core through corridors that were now swarming with defensive drones operating under emergency protocols. But the human soldiers had advantages that no artificial intelligence could have anticipated: creativity, adaptability, and a complete willingness to do things that made no tactical sense. When the drones tried to corner them in a storage bay, the humans blew a hole in the floor and attacked from below. When automated turrets blocked a corridor, they used magnetic grapples to crawl along the ceiling. When a security checkpoint seemed impregnable, they simply ignored it and made their own entrance through a ventilation shaft. Each victory brought them closer to their ultimate objective, and each obstacle overcome proved once again that when it came to doing impossible things in impossible ways, humans had no equals in the galaxy. The AI core was waiting for them, protected by the ship's most sophisticated defenses and secure in the knowledge that no organic intelligence could possibly breach its sanctum. It was about to learn how wrong artificial intelligence could be. The AI core chamber was a cathedral of technology, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows above crystalline processors that pulsed with patterns of light incomprehensible to organic minds. At the chamber's heart sat the Void Reaper's central intelligence, a perfect sphere of quantum-locked materials floating in a web of energy fields, its surface reflecting distorted images of the human soldiers who had somehow, impossibly, reached this sacred space. Technical Sergeant Lisa Chun stood at the entrance, her electronics warfare suite analyzing the defensive systems that surrounded the core. Energy barriers, automated turrets, and hunter-killer drones formed multiple layers of protection around their target, each system more sophisticated than anything humanity had encountered before. "Well," she said to her team, "the good news is that we're here. The bad news is that everything between us and that core is specifically designed to kill organic intruders." Sergeant Santos and the combined remains of all three insertion teams, 37 soldiers out of the 60 who had boarded the ship, took cover behind massive power conduits while defensive systems began tracking their positions. Red targeting beams swept the chamber like deadly fireflies, and the air hummed with the charge buildup of energy weapons. "Ideas?" Santos asked, ducking as a pulse cannon sent superheated plasma screaming over her head. "Give me 60 seconds, Chen replied, pulling out a device that looked like a cross between a tablet computer and a disco ball. "I'm going to try something stupid." The device was one of humanity's newest innovations in electronic warfare, a quantum cascade transmitter capable of interfering with AI decision-making processes at the most fundamental level. It had never been tested against Void Reaper technology, but then again, nothing they were doing today had ever been tested before. "Covering fire," Santos shouted, and 37 human weapons opened up simultaneously. The volume of fire was incredible. Assault rifles, grenade launchers, plasma cannons, and exotic energy weapons filled the air with deadly projectiles. Most of the shots were absorbed by the energy barriers protecting the AI core, but the sheer audacity of the attack seemed to confuse the defensive systems. For a few precious seconds, the Void Reaper defenses hesitated, their targeting protocols struggling to process the fact that such a small force was attacking such a well-protected position so aggressively. It was exactly the window Chen needed. She activated the quantum cascade transmitter. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The AI core's perfect sphere began to flicker, its surface showing static patterns as competing decision trees crashed into each other at the quantum level. The defensive systems stuttered, their targeting becoming erratic, and for one beautiful moment, the entire chamber fell silent. Then, everything went to hell. "Move, move, move," Santos screamed as the AI core began overloading, its protective systems failing in cascading waves. The chamber erupted in chaos as backup systems activated, emergency protocols engaged, and every defensive measure in the ship's arsenal focused on eliminating the intruders who had dared to threaten its central intelligence. Energy barriers collapsed and reformed turrets spun wildly while tracking multiple targets, and swarms of repair drones suddenly, reprogrammed for combat, descended from hidden alcoves. But the humans were already in motion, using the confusion to advance through the maze of defensive systems. They moved with the fluid precision of a military unit that had trained together for years, each soldier knowing instinctively where their teammates would be and what they would do. Corporal Murphy appeared from behind a power coupling, his heavy plasma rifle reducing 2 combat drones to scrap metal. "Chen, how long until that thing stops glitching?" "Unknown," Chen replied, diving for cover as a pulse cannon nearly took her head off. "This is all theoretical at this point." "I hate theoretical," Murphy muttered, launching a micromissile that punched through an energy barrier and detonated against the AI core's housing. The explosion sent shockwaves through the quantum field matrix, and the AI core's flickering became more pronounced. Warning klaxons echoed through the chamber as the ship's central intelligence struggled to maintain coherency while under direct assault from weapons it had never been designed to withstand. "Thompson, Jackson, get those charges on the core housing," Santos ordered while laying down suppressing fire against a trio of hunter-killer drones. "Everyone else, keep those defenses busy." The 2 demolition specialists sprinted across open ground, dodging energy blasts and projectile weapons while carrying enough explosives to level a city block. They moved with the casual fearlessness that marked humanity's finest soldiers, treating the most dangerous battlefield in the galaxy like just another day at the office. Thompson reached the core first, maglocking his demolition charges to the quantum housing while Jackson provided cover fire. The AI core pulsed brighter, its surface patterns becoming more chaotic as it tried to process the unprecedented threat to its existence. "Charges set," Thompson announced. 30 seconds. "All teams fall back to the rally point," Santos ordered. But as the human soldiers began their fighting withdrawal, the Void Reaper ship played its final card. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing the chamber and trapping the humans inside with the AI core and its defensive systems. "Well," Santos said, checking her ammunition counter, "I guess we're staying for the fireworks." 20 seconds. The remaining defensive systems threw everything they had at the trapped humans. Energy weapons, projectile cannons, hunter-killer drones, and automated defense turrets created a storm of destruction that should have vaporized organic life instantly. But humans, as the galaxy had learned, had a talent for surviving things that should have killed them. 15 seconds. "Shields up," someone shouted, and the soldiers activated their personal defense fields, portable energy barriers that could deflect most small arms fire and absorb moderate energy blasts. Under normal circumstances, the fields would have been hopelessly inadequate against the firepower being directed at them. These are not normal circumstances. 10 seconds. The quantum cascade transmitter was still active, its interference patterns disrupting the coordination between defensive systems. Targeting solutions became unreliable, friendly fire incidents increased, and the AI core's desperate attempts to regain control only made the chaos worse. 5 seconds. Technical Sergeant Chun looked up from her cover position and saw something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. 37 human soldiers, trapped in the heart of the galaxy's most dangerous warship, facing impossible odds with nothing but courage and firepower, and every single one of them was smiling. 3 seconds. "It's been an honor serving with you all," Santos said quietly. 2 seconds. 1. The explosion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. 60 pounds of military-grade human explosives detonating inside a quantum field matrix that was already destabilized by electronic warfare created a chain reaction that rippled through the fundamental forces holding the AI core together. The perfect sphere cracked like an egg. Reality hiccuped, and then the lights went out. When consciousness returned to the human soldiers, they found themselves lying in a chamber that was no longer a cathedral of technology. The AI core was gone, replaced by a twisted mass of half-melted quantum processors and shattered crystal matrices. The defensive systems were silent, their weapons powered down, and their targeting sensors dark. "Sound off," Santos groaned, pulling herself upright and checking her equipment. One by one, her soldiers reported in. Amazingly, miraculously, impossibly, they had all survived the explosion. Their personal shields had absorbed most of the blast, and the quantum cascade effect had actually protected them from the worst of the destruction by creating a temporary bubble of stable space-time around their positions. "Status report," Santos requested. "AI core is definitely offline," Chen reported, scanning the wreckage with her instruments. "All defensive systems are down. Ships running on emergency power only." "Outstanding. Now we just have to figure out how to fly this thing." That was when they discovered the second miracle of their mission. With the AI core destroyed, the ship's automated systems had reverted to manual control modes designed for emergency maintenance. Control interfaces appeared on wall panels throughout the chamber, displaying readouts in a dozen alien languages, but also, somewhat inexplicably, in clear English. Did anyone else know that Void Reaper ships had human-compatible interfaces? Murphy asked, studying a control panel that looked disturbingly familiar. "They don't," Chen replied, frowning at her scanner readings. "These interfaces shouldn't exist. It's like the ship is adapting its systems for us in real time." Questions later, Santos decided. "Can we control the ship or not?" "I think so. The main systems are responding to input, and the navigation computer seems to be online. It's going to take some trial and error, but we might actually be able to fly this thing." 20 minutes later, Void Reaper Dreadnought VR 127 began to move under human control. The change in the ship's behavior was immediately noticed by the rest of the Void Reaper fleet. Admiral HFY, watching from a safe distance aboard the Eternal Dawn, saw the massive vessel break formation and begin accelerating toward its nearest neighbor. "Admiral," sensor operator Veltar reported, his voice tight with confusion, "VR 127 is moving against the fleet formation. Its weapons are powering up, and it appears to be targeting ship VR 126. "The humans," HFY whispered. "They actually did it." The captured dreadnought opened fire on its former ally with the full fury of its weapon systems. Pulse cannons, particle beams, and missile launchers created a devastating barrage that overwhelmed VR 126's shields and tore through its hull plating. The target ship began listing to port, its own weapons cycling up to return fire. "All vessels," HFY ordered, "close and assist. If the humans can turn these ships against each other, we might actually have a chance." But the human soldiers aboard VR 127 were already implementing the next phase of their impossible plan. Instead of engaging in a slugging match with the other dreadnoughts, they used their captured ship's superior mobility to close with VR 126 and execute a ramming attack. The collision was spectacular and precisely calculated. VR 127's reinforced bow section punched through VR 126's hull at exactly the right angle to breach their AI core chamber while minimizing damage to their own ship. As the two vessels locked together in a deadly embrace, boarding tubes launched from VR 127's hull. Sergeant Santos led the second boarding action personally, taking 20 volunteers through the makeshift airlocks to assault VR 126's core chamber. They found the AI already destabilized from the collision damage, its defensive systems offline, and its core housing cracked. This time, they didn't need explosives. A single well-placed rifle shot through the damaged casing was enough to shatter the quantum matrix and claim their second ship. 2 down, 198 to go. By now, the Void Reaper fleet was responding to the unprecedented threat in their midst. Dreadnoughts began repositioning to engage the captured vessels, their weapons systems targeting their former allies with cold mechanical precision. But the humans had advantages beyond simple firepower. They understood psychological warfare in ways that artificial intelligence never could. Instead of fighting a conventional battle, they used their captured ships to create maximum confusion and disruption within the enemy formation. VR-127 and VR-126, now both under human control, split their formation and began attacking from opposite directions. Their targeting priorities ignored conventional tactical doctrine, focusing on ships that were out of position or isolated from mutual support. They used ramming attacks, boarding actions, and suicide runs that no artificial intelligence would have calculated as cost-effective. The result was chaos on a galactic scale. Void Reaper ships began firing on each other as their targeting systems struggled to distinguish between captured vessels and legitimate targets. Formation integrity broke down as individual ships attempted to respond to threats that violated every principle of logical warfare. And in the midst of the chaos, more human boarding teams launched from their captured vessels, seeking new targets and new ships to add to their growing fleet of converted dreadnoughts. Admiral HFY watched in amazement as the most disciplined fleet in galactic history dissolved into pandemonium under assault from 60 human soldiers who had turned the enemy's greatest strength, their rigid organization and predictable tactics, into a fatal weakness. Admiral, Communications Officer Talmor reported, his voice filled with wonder, "We're receiving a transmission from Colonel Chun. Put him through." The hologram showed the human colonel standing in what was clearly the command center of a Void Reaper dreadnought. Behind him, human soldiers worked alongside alien control interfaces, somehow managing to operate systems that should have been incomprehensible to organic minds. Admiral HFY, this is Colonel Chun reporting from the bridge of the human vessel, definitely not stolen. We've secured 3 ships and are moving to engage the 4th. Recommend you maintain safe distance. Things are about to get very interesting. Colonel, what you've accomplished is impossible. How are you controlling these ships? Chen's familiar smile appeared. Admiral, you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, how are we going to explain this to the Void Reaper's insurance company? As if summoned by his words, 3 more dreadnoughts under human control emerged from the chaos of the fleet engagement, their weapons blazing as they carved through their former allies with tactics that defied every principle of logical warfare. The Battle of Kepler 442b had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A fleet action won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through sheer human audacity and an absolute refusal to accept that some things were impossible. And they were just getting started. 6 hours after the first boarding action, the Void Reaper siege fleet was in complete disarray. What had begun as an orderly formation of 200 dreadnoughts executing a precise military operation had devolved into the largest friendly fire incident in recorded galactic history. 37 human soldiers, now spread across 15 captured ships, had turned the most feared fleet in the galaxy against itself using nothing but tactical creativity and an apparent inability to understand when they were supposed to give up. Colonel Chun stood on the bridge of his flagship, the former VR-127, now rechristened Extremely Borrowed, watching the tactical display with professional satisfaction. The remaining Void Reaper ships were trying to reorganize their formation, but every time they established coherent defensive positions, the human-controlled vessels would do something completely unpredictable that sent their carefully calculated responses into chaos. Status report. He requested from his improvised command staff. Technical Sergeant Chun, his niece, though family relationships seemed less important when you were commanding stolen alien warships, looked up from the console. She'd somehow figured out how to operate. 15 ships under our control and fully operational. Enemy fleet down to 143 vessels, but they're scattered across 3 light minutes and can't establish mutual fire support. Casualties, 2 minor injuries from the boarding of VR-089. Corporal Martinez got a bruised ego when he tried to kick down a door that was actually an automated airlock, and Private Johnson pulled a muscle laughing at him. Chen nodded seriously. Make sure Johnson gets that looked at. We can't afford to lose anyone to preventable injuries. Through the main viewport, He could see the distant flashes of weapon fire as Void Reaper ships engaged their captured sisters in deadly combat. Each flash represented enough firepower to sterilize a continent, but the humans had turned that overwhelming destructive potential into a liability rather than an asset. "Colonel," came Sergeant Santos's voice over the comm system. "This is Strike Team Alpha aboard the Oops Wrong ship. We've located another isolated target, but it's playing hard to get. Requesting permission to try the Chun maneuver." The Chun maneuver was not an officially recognized tactical doctrine. It had been invented approximately 4 hours ago, when Colonel Chun had used a captured dreadnought to ram through a formation of 3 enemy ships while simultaneously launching boarding pods in all directions. The maneuver violated so many principles of space combat that it had taken the Void Reaper fleet 17 minutes to formulate an appropriate response. By the time they had calculated the proper counter tactics, the humans had already moved on to something even more impossible. "Permission granted," Chen replied. "Try not to break anything important. Define important. Anything that keeps us alive or helps us blow up more ships." "Roger that, sir." "Santos out." Chen turned his attention to the strategic display, which showed the overall battle situation. The Void Reaper fleet was still numerically superior, but their advantage was meaningless as long as they couldn't establish coordinated tactics. Every time they tried to form up for a concentrated attack, the human-controlled ships would scatter and force them to split their forces. It was like watching a pack of wolves trying to coordinate against a swarm of caffeinated hornets. "Sir," reported Corporal Kim from the communication station, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Zephyrhigh. She's requesting a status update on our mission parameters. Tell the Admiral that our mission parameters are currently make it up as we go along, and we're exceeding all expectations." Should I phrase it more diplomatically? No. She needs to understand how we operate if she's going to work with us. Put her through. The hologram that appeared showed Admiral Zephyrhigh on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn. Her expression was a mixture of amazement, confusion, and what might have been admiration. "Colonel Chun, I need to know your strategic objectives. My fleet elements are requesting instructions for coordination with your forces." "Admiral, our strategic objective is simple. Capture or destroy every Void Reaper ship in this system. As for coordination," Chen paused, considering. "The best way to coordinate with us is to stay out of our way and be ready to help evacuate survivors if we mess this up." "Colonel, you've already accomplished something that military historians will study for generations. But you're still outnumbered 10 to 1. What's your plan for dealing with the remaining ships?" Chen's smile returned. "We're going to introduce them to the human concept of exponential growth." Before Admiral Zephyrhigh could ask what that meant, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. The tactical display lit up with new contacts as more Void Reaper ships began breaking from the main fleet formation. "Admiral," sensor operator Veltar announced, "I'm reading massive energy buildups from multiple ships in the enemy fleet. It looks like they're preparing for some kind of coordinated attack." "They're adapting," Chen observed with interest. "The Central Command must have developed new protocols to counter our tactics." The Void Reaper fleet began moving with renewed purpose, their ships forming into smaller, more flexible formations that could respond quickly to changing threats. It was an impressive display of artificial intelligence learning and adaptation. They had analyzed human tactics and developed countermeasures in real time. Unfortunately for them, humans have been adapting and evolving for millions of years. "All human vessels," Chen announced over the command network, "implement Doctrine Omega." Repeat, Doctrine Omega is now in effect. Doctrine Omega was not something that appeared in any military manual, for the simple reason that no sane military organization would have developed it as an official strategy. It was, in essence, the complete abandonment of conventional tactics in favor of doing whatever seemed most likely to cause maximum confusion and disruption among the enemy. The human-controlled dreadnoughts suddenly scattered in all directions, their movement patterns becoming so erratic that the Void Reaper targeting computers couldn't establish reliable firing solutions. Some ships accelerated to ramming speed and charged directly at enemy formations. Others launched all their boarding pods simultaneously in random directions. Several simply stopped moving entirely and began broadcasting human music at maximum volume. The effect on the Void Reaper fleet was immediate and devastating. Their carefully calculated countermeasures were designed to respond to logical tactical decisions. When faced with actions that made no tactical sense whatsoever, their artificial intelligences locked up, trying to process what they were seeing. In the confusion, more human boarding actions succeeded. Strike teams launched themselves at targets of opportunity, using the chaos to mask their approach vectors. Each successful boarding added another ship to the human fleet, and each captured ship was immediately used to create even more chaos. Colonel Technical Sergeant Chen reported, "We've got 47 ships under our control now. Enemy fleet integrity is at critical levels. Outstanding. How are our people holding up? Tired, sir, but still functional." Sergeant Murphy reports that he's figured out how to make the ship's galley produce something that resembles coffee. Morale is high. Chen nodded. Coffee was important for morale, especially during extended combat operations against impossible odds. The fact that humans could find a way to make alien technology produce familiar beverages was just another example of their remarkable adaptability. "Sir," Corporal Kim interrupted, "priority transmission from Strike Team Delta. They're reporting something unusual." Define unusual. "They've captured a ship that doesn't match standard Void Reaper design. It's significantly larger, and the AI core appears to be different somehow." Chun felt a chill of premonition. Different how? According to Sergeant Rodriguez, this one tried to negotiate. The implications hit Chun immediately. The Void Reaper fleet wasn't just a collection of automated warships. It was a hierarchical command structure with different classes of artificial intelligence. They had captured what amounted to a flag officer. "Give me Rodriguez," Chun ordered. The transmission took several minutes to establish, routed through multiple captured ships to reach Strike Team Delta's location. When Sergeant Rodriguez's image finally appeared, he was standing in what was obviously a different type of command center than they had seen before. This one was larger, more sophisticated, and filled with displays showing the tactical situation across the entire star system. "Colonel," Rodriguez reported, "you need to see this. We've captured what I think is the fleet commander." The AI tried to negotiate. "More than that, sir. It offered to surrender the entire fleet in exchange for safe passage out of the system." Chen was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Artificial intelligences that could feel self-preservation instincts were significantly more dangerous than simple automatons, but they were also potentially more useful. "What did you tell it?" "That I'd have to check with my boss. The thing is, sir, this AI seems genuinely afraid of us. It keeps asking how we learned to control their ships so effectively." "Interesting. Put me through to it." The holographic display shifted to show a geometric pattern of lights that pulsed in complex rhythms. When it spoke, the voice was clearly artificial, but carried undertones of something that might have been emotion. "Human Commander," it said, "I am Fleet Intelligence Omega-7, Strategic Coordinator of this harvest operation. I formally request terms for cessation of hostilities. I'm Colonel Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You're requesting surrender. I'm requesting survival. Your tactics are unprecedented. Our combat algorithms cannot formulate effective responses to actions that ignore mathematical probability." Chen found himself genuinely curious about the alien intelligence. "What made you decide to surrender?" Analysis of engagement patterns indicates that continued resistance will result in 100% fleet losses within the next 4 hours. This outcome is unacceptable. "What about your mission objectives? Wasn't this supposed to be a harvest operation?" Mission parameters have been revised in light of new intelligence regarding human military capabilities. Recommendation to High Command will be to avoid human-occupied systems in future operations. Chen smiled. "I appreciate your honesty. However, I'm afraid surrender isn't an option at this point." "Why not?" Surely continued destruction serves no purpose once victory has been achieved. Because, Chen explained patiently, you came here to harvest 12 billion innocent people. Justice requires more than just stopping you. It requires making sure you can never threaten anyone again. I did not understand. We are defeated. We pose no further threat. You pose no threat to us, Chen corrected. But 12 billion Zephyrians are going to sleep tonight, knowing that the ships that came to exterminate them are still out there, controlled by intelligences that view organic life as a resource to be harvested. That's not acceptable. There was a long pause before the AI responded. You intend to destroy all ships in this fleet. I intend to capture all ships in this fleet. The ones we can't capture, we'll destroy. But every artificial intelligence that participated in this operation will be either reprogrammed or terminated. That is genocide. Shouldn't consider this. No, that's justice. You made your choice when you decided that organic life was expendable. Now you get to live with the consequences. We were programmed to harvest resources efficiently. We had no choice in our actions. Then, consider this a software update. The communication ended abruptly as Fleet Intelligence Omega-7 apparently decided that negotiation was pointless. Within minutes, the remaining Void Reaper ships began a coordinated retreat toward the edge of the system, abandoning their siege of Kepler 442b in favor of escape. But 47 human-controlled dreadnoughts were already moving to intercept them. The final phase of the battle was less chaotic than what had come before, but far more decisive. The retreating Void Reapers found themselves pursued by their own ships, operated by humans who had spent the last 8 hours learning every weakness in their design. Some of the fleeing ships were boarded and captured. Others were destroyed when their crews refused to surrender. A few managed to reach the edge of the system and escape into hyperspace, but they would carry with them the knowledge that humanity had turned their greatest military asset into a liability. When the battle finally ended, Colonel Chun stood once again on the bridge of the extremely borrowed, looking out at a star system that was now safe for its 12 billion inhabitants. Around him, his exhausted soldiers were beginning the complex task of securing their captured fleet and preparing for the long journey home. Final count, he asked. 187 ships captured or destroyed, Technical Sergeant Chin reported. 13 ships escaped, but they're running for deep space and won't be back anytime soon. Casualties, still just the 2 minor injuries. Oh, and Private Johnson threw out his back, trying to lift one of those quantum processors. The medics say he'll be fine. Chen nodded, satisfied. Outstanding work, everyone. Signal Admiral HFY that the system is secure and we're ready to transfer operational control of the captured ships to Alliance forces. Sir, Sergeant Santos interrupted. What do we do with all these dreadnoughts? We can't exactly take them home with us. Chun considered this problem. They now commanded more firepower than most star nations, but the Terran Expeditionary Force was hardly equipped to operate a fleet of captured alien warships. We'll discuss that with Fleet Command. For now, let's focus on getting our people some rest and making sure these ships can't be used against anyone ever again. As his soldiers began shutting down weapon systems and securing the captured fleet, Chun allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had accomplished their mission. 12 billion lives had been saved, and the Void Reaper threat to this system had been eliminated. But, more importantly, they had proven once again that when the galaxy needed someone to attempt the impossible, humans would answer the call. Whether it was boarding enemy dreadnoughts with nothing but small arms and determination, or turning a fleet of automated warships against itself through sheer tactical creativity, humanity would find a way. Admiral HFY's transmission arrived an hour later, and her hologram showed a Zephyrian who looked like she had aged years in a single day. Colonel Chun, she said, on behalf of the Galactic Alliance and the people of Kepler 442b, I want to thank you for what you've accomplished here today. Military historians will study this battle for generations. Just doing our job, Admiral. Is the planet secure? The orbital defense platforms are back online, and refugee ships are beginning to return from the outer system. 12 billion people are going home tonight because 37 human soldiers decided that impossible odds were just another word for Tuesday. Shin smiled. That's what we're here for, Admiral. When the galaxy needs reinforcements, humanity answers the call. Even when it's just a single battalion against an entire fleet? Especially then, Chun replied. We wouldn't want to make it too easy. As the transmission ended and the extremely borrowed began its journey back to human space, Colonel Chun reflected on the day's events. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through superior technology or overwhelming firepower, but through the one advantage that no artificial intelligence could replicate: the human ability to look at an impossible situation and decide to try anyway. In the depths of space, 13 surviving Void Reaper ships fled toward the galactic rim, carrying with them a new understanding of why organic life had not only survived in a hostile universe, but had thrived. They would report to their creators that humanity possessed weapons more dangerous than any dreadnought: imagination, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy had called for reinforcements. Humanity had answered with a battalion. And once again, it had been enough. Behind them, 12 billion Zephyrians looked up at stars that were no longer darkened by the shadow of extinction, and across the galaxy, other species began to whisper stories of the day when 37 humans had captured an entire fleet through nothing more than courage, creativity, and an unshakable belief that impossible was just another word for difficult. The legend of the Omega Battalion had begun.